They were doing tests, they didn't find anything, and in her own way, she was getting tired or weaker, but she still went to her 85th birthday party. She still went out for pizza with my cousin for his child's some sort of celebration. And by the time she went into the hospital, they basically said, you have about a week and a half left to live. And she accepted it like she accepted many things. She had tremendous belief in God and God's presence in her life, and she really just knew what was happening, accepted it, had her children and many, many grandchildren around her, and had what I would call a perfect death, meaning it wasn't a painful death, and she really went into the next world with a lot of loved ones around her. My uncle, who's a doctor, said he never saw an ICU room so packed with people. Normally in the ICU they don't let so many visitors in. I assume because she was dying they made an exception, but really non-stop visitors coming in and to say goodbye, and I had the privilege to say goodbye to her on the phone, as did my children, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But first, a little bit of biographical information. She was born in 1925 in Williamsburg, New York, when Williamsburg was really a hotbed of Hasidic. A lot of Hasidim lived there, a very Orthodox Jewish community. She was the 7th of 13 children, 6 children above and 6 children below, so she was really a middle child. And her father started what's called a free loan society during the Depression, so to ease the economic hardship for many of the Jews, and because he was busy in the morning giving out the loans and collecting from those who could afford to pay back, he actually was given a certain leniency, as those who have learned brachot know, you're supposed to daven up until a certain time. The Satmar Rebbe, who lived in Williamsburg at the time, had terrible digestive problems, and so he couldn't daven until about 10 o'clock in the morning. And so they would try to get 10 men to daven with him. He was already an older man, and my great-grandfather was one of the men who was privileged to daven and go to the mikveh with the Satmar Rebbe. He actually died sitting outside the mikveh, my great-grandfather, not the Satmar Rebbe. And so she grew up in a very pious household, not a lot of book learning, neither of her parents were educated, but again, very devout, very committed to their Judaism. At a time where American Jewry was beginning to assimilate, this family kind of dug its heels in, and out of the 13 children, 12 remained very Orthodox to very Orthodox, 1 became conservative. So again, their legacy definitely remained. So my grandmother often liked to talk about the fact that she was the first graduating class of Beis Yaakov in Williamsburg, and that had a tremendous influence on her life until the day she died. In fact, in the last conversation I had with her, she reminded me of that fact, that she had graduated from Beis Yaakov, and she took the messages of her teachers very seriously, and their spiritual messages, and again, that was something she really passed along to her children and to her grandchildren and to her great-grandchildren. But in an unusual twist, she was an interior decorator with a tremendous flair for design and fashion. I have some pictures here that you're welcome to look at later. You'll see that even in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, her sense of style was unparalleled. She was also a Hebrew school teacher, so that kind of integration very much defined her. She was a Rebbitzin. My grandfather was a rabbi. He got his smicha from a yeshiva called Chaim Berlin. And but she was a very elegant rabbi, a Rebbitzin, I'm sorry. There aren't many Rebbitzins who looked quite the way she did. She just always had accessories and trims and belts, and whether it was her wigs or her huge hats. People came over to me when they heard she died and said, "Oh, I remember her cute. She wore these enormous hats, and she was not a very tall woman, but she carried them extremely well." I would say even she was very easygoing about letting her children and grandchildren kind of do with her as they would. For her birthday party a month ago, my aunt bought her one of those like Purim costumes, like a pink princess costume with a feather boa, and she wore a blonde wig, and she looked like a Barbie doll. She looked adorable, and she really actually looked like a little girl. It was very sweet, and she said that she really had to push herself to go to the party because she at that point was already, the cancer that would take over her body was already beginning to make itself known. But she went and she just had a tremendously good time, and everyone enjoyed being around her. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about the impact she had on my life, and something my father said at the funeral, and then end with a few words my mother wrote towards her 80th birthday. At the funeral, my father said that when he got married, he really thought he was going to build his own house. That's what you think. You marry someone, you take your wife home, and you begin building your house together. He said no, what he discovered very quickly is that my grandmother, whose name was Sophie, was going to be building the house along with him. And so every week he said to me, even until now, he's been married for 42 years, The line in Eshet Chayot, Sophia Halichot Beta, she anticipates the ways of her household, he would interpret as Sophie Halichot Beta. Sophie is anticipating the ways of my household. And he said it tongue-in-cheek, but the truth is, what he was trying to emphasize is the fact that she felt she and my grandfather had a responsibility, even after their children grew up and got married, to make it clear what direction the household would take, the model that she expected their Shabbat tables to be organized around. And while this may sound heavy-handed, and it was at times, for my brother growing up, he was a big sports and TV fan, we cannot talk about sports and TV at their Shabbat table. This was rather difficult. But she really had a very rigorous attitude towards what certain religious parts of religious life should be. And the truth is her children more or less adopted them, often with a little less rigidity, but giving divrei Torah, talking about Torah, singing at the table, and so on, were very much incorporated into our life. That said, again, during the week she was a lot of fun. She was a tremendous hiker. She went hiking. She and my grandfather would go on ridiculous hiking trips with my parents, who sometimes hiked well beyond my physical capabilities, but my grandmother always made it to the top of the mountain. My grandmother was a tremendous fan of ice cream, and we went out for ice cream a lot and coffee a lot. And that said, meaning she was very selfless, but she was also selfish in the sense she would go away to a spa with a friend or a family member, meaning she knew how to take care of herself and enjoy her life as well. It wasn't only about the children. Something that she really gave over to us, and I called my sister for some ideas, which I talk about, she mentioned that, remember the Seder, the Pesach Seder. So when we go to my grandparents, it would last till about 3 in the morning. It was a little too much, to be honest, but what we got from that is that the educational legacy that the Seder has, or that the Shabbat table has, needs to be incorporated into our own lifestyles. And I would say the grandchildren really, in a more creative way, have adopted a lot of what she tried to instill in terms of understanding our responsibility to our children. In fact, it was almost my last conversation with her. The last one I really didn't understand what she was saying, but the last one I understood. She basically gave me a little lecture on my responsibility to raising my children to be from, that she and my grandfather had left a legacy of belief in God, commitment to Torah, and that she expected me with teenage grandchildren to be, I was the only one who got that lecture, which makes me wonder why I was the only one who got that lecture. But she reminded me of Beis Yaakov and so on and so forth, and I obviously it was a very poignant moment, an emotional moment, and something I shared with my children. Her presence was definitely vital, vibrant. People who came to the Shiva over and over again were just shocked that she died. I think we all thought she had years and years ahead of her. My mother, who has been ill for the last 5 years, my grandmother, was just a comfort that my grandmother was always there making Pesach for her. And again, the woman was 84 last year and basically made Pesach because my mother was in the hospital. And when I say make Pesach, they're the ones who take the toothbrushes to the cracks in the floor, meaning no chametz will exist in a house that Sophie Ebert is in, but well beyond what the halakha demands. Meaning making Pesach with her is an exhausting experience, and then putting away Pesach, which my husband did the first year we were married, is equally exhausting. She turns into a drill sergeant and basically bosses everyone around, but the work gets done, it all gets done. She, in my house as well, always had my children working much more efficiently than I'm ever able to. Really someone who takes charge, meaning she, this summer, was in Israel, and my sister has 2 very small children. She was down on the floor playing with them. Again, not many great-grandmothers are so involved in their children's lives, great-grandchildren's lives. My daughter Eden had a spa birthday party, and she went right along putting avocado on her face and cucumbers on her eyes, which made her look a little ridiculous, but it was part of the fun, and she went along with whatever, more or less, we were doing. And so her loss is tremendous on many levels. First of all, she was a lot of fun to be with. She came for Shabbat in the summer to my house. It was one of those horribly hot Shabbats. We have 2 rooms with air conditioning. And she let my uncle have one, and my sister with her little children. My sister's pregnant. And she took a room without air conditioning, and my husband moved her bed right under a ceiling fan. It was still really hot, and she just kept thanking us all Shabbat. Like, thank you, that was much more pleasant. Meaning she really was willing to inconvenience herself or find a minimum amount of convenience, whereas, as I said, many women her age would say, look, I want the air conditioner, I'm 85, I'm almost 85, and I've worked for it. So she really, was a lot of fun to be with, and a very important person. She also, as I said, decorated almost all of her grandchildren and grandchildren's houses, her children's houses. She redecorated my mother's bathroom, something that she and my father bickered about all summer when I was there, because the cost was, of course, more than he thought, but she kept reminding him she waived her decorator's fee, which most of her clients pay, so that was supposed to make him feel better. I'm just going to read a little bit to close of what my mother wrote, which I think expresses very well what she was like. Your elegance and beauty are legendary. People still remember your dress in Williamsburg and comment on your style at more recent smachot. Looking at pictures taken through the years, one sees your fashion flair, your individuality, and at times your unconventionality. I still remember when you took a fake fern out of a container and fastened it to your hair, creating a smashing and unique look. This act was a precursor to the big pink satin flower that you wore to Nechama's wedding and the feathers and trims that you used to decorate your hats. This pink satin flower, there's a picture in here, my husband was just in shock. She told him it was very Paris, and she wore it, and she's the only one who could carry it off. It looked great on her, but anyone else who tried it on looked ridiculous. Your love for your family knows no bounds, and it is rare for you to say no to any request, whether reasonable or unreasonable. Despite your busy schedule, you always make time for your family and your extended family. A call at night for your decorating expertise is never too late or too troublesome. Your home is always open to your family, whether for Shabbat or Chag, no matter how difficult your week. Until recently, you ran a taxi service to and from the airport as well as an open all-hours restaurant. You have the ability to make a person feel special as you fuss over them when they visit, spoiling them with little treats. And so on. So again, she was not a saint. As I said, there were times her rigidity or her commitment to belief was a little overbearing, but she was a tremendous presence. And my daughter's bar mitzvah, which is in 2 months, it's just unthinkable to her that my grandmother isn't going to be there. And she got on the phone with her at the last conversation she had, and she started crying. And my grandmother said, "Don't cry." And she said, you never push off a simcha, and obviously she'll be there. Her presence will be felt. It's a pale shadow of what she was like in real life, but we will continue to remember her and maintain her legacy. Yehei Zechra Baruch.